In the winding streets of York, on April 13th, 1570, a child was born whose name would be forever branded into the annals of rebellion. His parents called him Guy, though in later years he would adopt the continental Guido, a name that better matched the soldier of faith he would become. Few could have foreseen that this Yorkshire boy, growing up beneath the towering shadow of York Minster, would one day be remembered as the man who nearly toppled a kingdom in fire. Fawkes' father, Edward, was a proctor in the ecclesiastical courts, a respectable position that provided stability and modest prestige. His mother, Edith Blake, came from a family bound deeply to the Catholic faith, a dangerous allegiance in an age when Protestant England demanded conformity. When Edward died while Guy was still a boy, Edith's remarriage to the recusant Dionis Baynbrigge ensured that Catholic sympathies would root themselves firmly in her son's heart. York, in the late 16th century, was a city of contradictions, rich in medieval tradition, alive with markets and guilds, yet heavy with suspicion and fear. To be Catholic under Elizabeth I was to exist in the shadows. Harsh fines punished non-attendance at Anglican services, and priests who dared minister to recusants risked the gallows. Guy Fawkes grew up breathing this tension like the damp northern air, learning early the price of loyalty to Rome. At St. Peter's School, York, the young Fawkes formed bonds with John and Christopher Wright, brothers who, years later, would join him in a conspiracy that shook England to its core. The school, ironically, would go on to boast of him as its most infamous alumnus, even as the nation burned his effigy each year in contempt. As a boy, Fawkes was remembered for his courtesy, a natural charisma that set him apart. Yet beneath the cheerful exterior lay a seriousness of mind, an intensity that would harden into unyielding resolve. Tragedy struck early. His father's death deprived him of guidance, leaving Guy to mature quickly. But the presence of a stepfather immersed in the underground Catholic world shaped his convictions in decisive ways. He was not merely a believer, he became a militant Catholic, one who saw faith not as private devotion, but as a cause worth waging war for. By his early 20s, Fawkes had sold the small estate he inherited and embarked on a soldier's life abroad. The 80 Years' War in the Low Countries called to him, a crucible where Catholic Spain clashed with Protestant rebels. There, in the banners of the Habsburgs and the boom of cannons, he found purpose. For more than a decade, Fawkes fought under the banner of Archduke Albert of Austria, distinguishing himself as a professional soldier. At the Siege of Calais in 1596, he stood amid thunder and smoke, mastering the art of explosives. Among comrades, he earned a reputation as both disciplined and daring, admired for his courage under fire. In Spain and Flanders, he became Guido, an Englishman who had cast off his homeland's heresy and taken up arms for Catholic Europe. Spain, though, was not merely a battlefield, but a sanctuary. Fawkes petitioned King Philip III to support a Catholic rising in England. Though rebuffed, the attempt reveals the depth of his zeal. For him, England's Protestant monarchy was not legitimate. It was a usurpation waiting to be consumed in holy fire. When James I ascended the throne in 1603, Catholics briefly hoped for leniency. After all, James's mother had been Mary, Queen of Scots. Yet those hopes soon crumbled. Instead of tolerance, the new king hardened penalties, determined to root out recusancy once and for all. For Guido Fawkes, who returned to England in 1604, this was betrayal incarnate. It was here, in this atmosphere of despair and fury, that Fawkes crossed paths with Robert Catesby. Charismatic, relentless, and willing to gamble everything, Catesby had devised a plan of almost unthinkable daring, to strike a single blow that would decapitate Protestant rule at its heart. Fawkes, hardened by war and fluent in the deadly language of powder and flame, was exactly the man the plot required. His skills, his very identity, would fuse with Catesby's vision. And so, the soldier from York became more than a conspirator. He became the match poised to ignite England's destiny. Conspiracy in the shadows, The gunpowder plot unfolds. London, 1604. Beneath the smoky rafters of a modest house on the Strand, 5 men huddled in conspiratorial whispers. The fire crackled in the grate, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and lean closer, as if eager to eavesdrop. The air was thick with candle smoke, damp wool, and the unshakable scent of desperation. Here, in secrecy, England's most audacious conspiracy was born. At its centre stood Robert Catesby, a gentleman of Warwickshire, tall and commanding, with eyes alight from both charisma and fanaticism. His family, like so many Catholic households, had paid dearly for recusancy. His father had been imprisoned, fined, and stripped of privileges, his lands diminished under the relentless hand of Elizabethan law. For Catesby, enough was enough. The accession of James I in 1603 had sparked false hope of relief, but the king had only tightened the screws. In Parliament, James declared he would harry Catholics out of the land. Those words reverberated like a curse through every Catholic household, and in Catesby's mind, they ignited a vision of vengeance. The plan he presented to his companions was staggering in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope: blow up the Houses of Parliament at the state opening. In one instant, the king, his family, his ministers, and the Protestant elite would be obliterated. In the ensuing chaos, the plotters would seize James's 9-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth, and install her as a Catholic monarch under their control. Around Catesby that evening sat men who would soon be immortalized as traitors: Thomas Wintour, a lawyer of intelligence and resolve, fluent in foreign tongues and able to secure continental allies; John Wright, a swordsman with a reputation for reckless courage; Thomas Percy, related to the powerful Earl of Northumberland, whose connections gave the group access to court circles; and finally, Guido, Guy Fawkes, the soldier returned from Spain, master of fire and powder, who would serve as the hand that struck the match. They swore an oath upon the Holy Sacrament, sealing their pact with solemnity. To betray it was not only treason, but damnation of the soul. The circle was complete, and the plan, once whispered, began to take form. In the following months, the plot expanded like a storm gathering strength. Catesby's fiery conviction drew others into the fold. The Wright brothers both signed on fully, their loyalty to Catesby outweighing all hesitation. Percy, exploiting his position as a gentleman pensioner, a royal bodyguard, secured the crucial access that transformed ambition into possibility. He rented a ground-floor cellar from a government official named John Wynyard. That cellar lay directly beneath the House of Lords itself. It was perfect. Under the guise of coal and firewood deliveries, the conspirators smuggled barrel after barrel of gunpowder into the vault. By spring 1605, 36 barrels, weighing nearly 2,500 kilograms, lay hidden beneath Parliament, enough powder to rip the building apart stone by stone and send the monarch's body soaring like ash into the London sky. And who better to guard this powder keg than Guy Fawkes? Using the alias John Johnson, he presented himself as Percy's servant, lodging in the cellar, watchful and silent. His experience in the Spanish Wars, his calm demeanour under pressure, made him indispensable. He was the keeper of the fire, the custodian of destruction. Even as the barrels lay in waiting, the conspirators continued their careful preparations. Horses were gathered in the Midlands, ready to ride once the king and Parliament were gone. Catholic gentlemen sympathetic to their cause were discreetly sounded out. In the halls of Lambeth, in dimly lit rooms, they gathered to reaffirm their vow upon prayer books, in ceremonies led by Jesuit priests like Father John Gerard. Yet for all their secrecy, unease gnawed at the group. Francis Tresham, newly recruited and bound by family ties to Lord Monteagle, grew increasingly anxious. To him, the scale of the destruction, the indiscriminate slaughter of nobles and commoners alike, seemed too monstrous. Others, too, questioned whether the blood of innocents could be justified as collateral for faith. Still, Catesby pressed forward, He saw hesitation as weakness, doubt as betrayal. The nature of the disease, he declared, requires so sharp a remedy. For him, there could be no half measures. As the summer of 1605 passed into autumn, delays struck. The opening of Parliament, first scheduled for February, was postponed due to plague ravaging London. Thousands perished. Funerary bells tolled daily. Parliament was pushed back to November, giving the conspirators more time, which they interpreted as providence. God himself, they believed, had granted them this delay to refine their holy mission. By early November, every detail was in place. The powder lay hidden beneath the Lords. Fawkes kept watch, prepared to strike. Catesby and his companions gathered arms and waited in the Midlands. The trap was set, and the king, so they believed, was about to be swallowed by flame and fury. Yet, as all conspiracies must, theirs began to unravel, not through divine fate nor enemy genius, but by something far more human. A whisper of warning, a letter slipped into a nobleman's hand. A letter, a search, a betrayal. The night, the plot was broken. On the damp October evening of 1605, fate crept silently into the conspiracy. While Guy Fawkes kept his lonely vigil in the cellar beneath the House of Lords, an anonymous hand penned words that would doom him. The letter, delivered on October 26th to Lord William Monteagle, was written in a trembling, cryptic style. "My lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I wish your preservation. Therefore I would advise you, as you tender your life, to find some excuse to shift your attendance at this Parliament, for God and man have concurred to punish the wickedness of this time. And think not slightly of this advertisement, but retire yourself into your country, where you may expect the event in safety. For though there be no appearance of any stir, yet I say they shall receive a terrible blow this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them." Monteagle, puzzled and alarmed, carried the letter to Robert Cecil, the king's spymaster. Cecil, whose entire career had been built upon sniffing out treason, kept his counsel. Rather than strike immediately, he waited. He understood that conspiracies ripen like fruit, better to catch the culprits in the act than merely in rumour. For days, tension hung over Whitehall. King James himself read the letter on November 1st. Unlike others, he discerned its hidden meaning. This counsel, he mused, imports a blow, and that with powder. His insight shifted the course of history. On the night of November 4th, Sir Thomas Knivet, acting under royal orders, led guards to search the Parliament cellars. Their lanterns cut through the gloom as they descended into the vaults, and there, among heaps of wood and coal, they found a man cloaked and booted, his face calm, his manner steady. He called himself John Johnson, but beneath the alias lay Guy Fawkes. In his pockets they discovered slow matches and touchwood, tools of detonation. Behind the stacked timber they uncovered the barrels, thick-bellied and silent, holding enough gunpowder to level Westminster. Fawkes was seized, bound, and hauled before King James. The monarch, astonished at his composure, later remarked that the prisoner possessed a Roman resolution. When asked bluntly what he intended, Fawkes answered with chilling candour, "To blow you Scotch beggars back to your native mountains." His boldness unsettled even his captors, but defiance would not shield him from what was to come. He was taken to the Tower of London, fortress of the condemned. There, beneath its stone walls scarred by centuries of imprisonment, the rack awaited him. At first, he resisted interrogation, refusing to name his fellows. The king authorized torture by degrees, beginning gently, then proceeding to the worst. The rack stretched him mercilessly, joints popping, sinews tearing. Inch by inch, his body was pulled apart while the interrogators demanded names. Still, Fawkes held out, his silence a last act of rebellion. For 2 days, he endured the unendurable, earning grudging admiration even from his tormentors. But no man can resist forever. On November 7th, shattered and broken, he yielded. Barely able to hold the quill, he scrawled a confession. His once bold signature, Guido Fawkes, was reduced to a trembling shadow of itself, simply Guido, wavering and faint. That document, preserved still, speaks more loudly than any chronicle of what he suffered. From his lips and his pen came the names Cecil had waited for: Catesby, the Wrights, Percy, Digby, and the rest. Some would be captured. Others, like Catesby, would die in a desperate gunfight at Holbeach House. But the backbone of the plot was broken, its fire doused before it ever touched the fuse. News of the conspiracy spread like wildfire through London. Bells rang in thanksgiving, bonfires blazed in celebration of the king's deliverance. And for Guy Fawkes, there remained only the reckoning. Justice on display, trial, sentence, and the hangman's stage. January 1606. The frost lay heavy over London, its streets crowded with anticipation. From taverns to palaces, all whispered of the trial of the men who had conspired to blow the realm to pieces. The greatest hall in England, Westminster Hall, was chosen as the stage. The vaulted chamber, built centuries earlier under William Rufus, had seen the downfall of rebels before: William Wallace, Thomas More, the Earl of Essex. Now it was Guy Fawkes and his companions who stood beneath its hammer-beamed roof, faces pale, chains clinking with every movement. Fawkes himself was gaunt, his body wasted from weeks of torment in the Tower. Yet he carried himself with a strange composure, the soldier's bearing never entirely lost. Alongside him stood Thomas Wintour, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Keyes, Everard Digby, and others, each knowing full well that the verdict was decided before the trial began. Presiding above them was Sir John Popham, Lord Chief Justice of England, a man whose reputation for severity was legendary. At the prosecution's head thundered Sir Edward Coke, master orator and scourge of traitors. Holding aloft the lantern found with Fawkes in the cellar, Coke proclaimed, "Behold the very light that would have ushered in England's darkest hour." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Spectators craned to see the men accused of almost erasing a kingdom. For Coke, the case was theatre, and he played his role to perfection, painting the plotters as monsters who would have slain not only king and court, but innocents by the thousand. The accused, denied legal counsel as was the law in treason trials, could offer little but brief statements. Sir Everard Digby pleaded for mercy, citing his noble birth. Others held their tongues. When Fawkes was called upon, his voice rasped from torture, yet his words carried a blunt honesty. He admitted his intent but declared the cause just, to relieve his fellow Catholics from persecution. It mattered not. The sentence was foreordained. On January 27th, the conspirators were condemned by the ancient statute of treason. They were to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, the most brutal penalty known to English law. Popham intoned the grisly formula: "You shall be drawn on hurdles to the place of execution. You shall there be hanged by the neck, and being alive cut down, your privy members shall be cut off, your bowels taken out and burned before you, your head smitten off, and your body divided into 4 quarters, to be disposed of at the King's Majesty's pleasure." The words chilled even hardened ears. Yet to the Jacobean state, the punishment was as symbolic as it was savage. Treason was not simply a crime, it was an assault upon the body politic. The traitor must be destroyed utterly, his flesh scattered as warning. And so, on January 30th and 31st, the executions were carried out. At St. Paul's Churchyard, and later Old Palace Yard, great crowds gathered, merchants, apprentices, noblemen, all pressing close to glimpse the fate of traitors. The first day saw Digby, Robert Wintour, John Grant, and Thomas Bates dragged on hurdles through the filth of London streets, jeered and pelted by the mob. At the scaffold, some spoke, others prayed, and then each met the hangman's rope. Half strangled, they were cut down alive, their abdomens opened, their hearts torn out and burned while they still gasped for air. Heads were raised high, the crowd roaring approval. The following day came the final quartet: Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood, Robert Keyes, and Guy Fawkes himself. Fawkes, weakened and scarcely able to stand, was hauled on a hurdle from the Tower to Westminster. His face, once stern and soldierly, was now hollow, but his eyes still carried that iron spark. Mounting the scaffold, he did not plead, nor did he curse. Instead, in a final act of will, he chose his own end. As the noose was placed about his neck, he leapt from the ladder. The rope snapped his neck instantly. The crowd gasped. In denying the executioner the satisfaction of mutilating him alive, he robbed the spectacle of its cruelest triumph. Even so, his corpse was butchered, quartered, and the remnants displayed upon city gates as grim trophies of royal justice. Thus ended Guy Fawkes, not in the thunder of his powder, but in the silence of the scaffold. Yet in his leap there flickered a last spark of defiance, a gesture that history would not forget. From ashes to icon, the enduring flame of the 5th of November. On the evening of November 5th, 1605, London erupted into celebration. Bonfires lit the night sky, bells rang from steeples, and the city roared with relief at its miraculous deliverance. What began as a spontaneous thanksgiving soon became ritual. By royal decree, Parliament ordered that the day be observed annually. Each year henceforth, England was to remember the King's preservation from the powder treason. Thus was born Bonfire Night, a commemoration not only of survival, but of the state's victory over treason. In the centuries that followed, the tradition evolved into a spectacle of fire and noise. Children paraded effigies of Guy Fawkes through the streets, calling out for "a penny for the Guy." The effigies were fed to the flames, consumed before the cheering of the crowd. Fireworks, first used in England during Elizabeth's reign, soon became inseparable from the night's festivities. Their bursts of light mirrored the destruction that never was, the echo of an explosion that remained forever unrealized. The bonfires, however, carried a darker undertone. For many years they were accompanied by virulent anti-Catholic displays. Effigies of the Pope were burned alongside that of Fawkes, a symbolic reminder that the memory of the plot was weaponized against all recusants. In towns like Lewes, Sussex, entire processions took on the air of pageant and protest, effigies of unpopular public figures thrown into the flames alongside the old Guy. Yet history is rarely fixed. Over time, the meaning of November 5th shifted. By the 18th century, Guy Fawkes himself was no longer seen solely as a villain, but also as a figure of dark fascination. The rhyme, "Remember, remember the 5th of November," took root in nursery chants, his name becoming part of the cultural rhythm of English childhood. The man, once cut into quarters by royal decree, became stitched together in collective memory, at first as a cautionary tale, later as something more ambiguous. In the 19th century, children's cries for "a penny for the Guy" turned Fawkes into a kind of folk character, part of autumn's rituals alongside apples, baked potatoes, and firelit gatherings. By the 20th century, his image began to mutate further. Writers and artists reimagined him not as a failed assassin, but as a symbol of resistance. That transformation reached its zenith in the graphic novel V for Vendetta, 1980s, and its later film adaptation. In its pages, a masked revolutionary, his face modelled on the stylized visage of Guy Fawkes, wages war against tyranny. The Fawkes mask, white and grinning with arched brows and pointed beard, leapt from the story into reality. Protesters around the world donned it, from anti-globalization marches to the Arab Spring, from Occupy Wall Street to the hacktivist collective Anonymous. What had begun as an instrument of state propaganda, the burning of a traitor's effigy, became, centuries later, a global symbol of rebellion against oppression. The irony is profound. The punishment meant to obliterate Guy Fawkes, his body destroyed, his memory vilified. failed. Instead, the fire meant to consume him became the very medium through which he endured. Each November 5th, flames rise once more into the night, and his name is spoken, his image conjured. Modern debates swirl around bonfire night. Environmental concerns have seen some councils replace bonfires with light shows or laser displays. Some lament the fading of tradition, others welcome new ways of remembering without smoke and fire. Yet, whether through crackling flames or neon light, the essence remains. Communities gather, children watch the sky explode in sparks, and the old rhyme is repeated. Remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be Forgotten it has not been, not in 4 centuries. And so, Guy Fawkes lives on, in bonfires and fireworks, in rhymes and masks, in the paradoxical space between traitor and hero. England once tore him limb from limb to erase him. Instead, history reassembled him as something greater than flesh, a symbol. To some, he remains a fanatic, to others, a freedom fighter, to many, simply the man behind a mask. But always, he endures. Each November, as the sparks fly and the fire roars, the question is asked anew: was Guy Fawkes the enemy of England, or its most enduring reminder that power, no matter how absolute, can always be challenged? The executioner's knife silenced his body, the gallows scattered his remains, but they could not silence his name. From the ashes of treason, Guy Fawkes became legend, hated, feared, admired, reimagined. And as long as the flames of bonfire night rise into the cold November sky, so too will the ghost of Guido linger, watching from the shadows, forever reminding us of the night England came closest to being undone by fire.